Hey everyone, and welcome back to Hunterville. In today's episode, we're going to focus on building the city's sports stadium and fill in some blocks near that, in between the stadium and the train line, and do some sort of medium density residential buildings as well. So to start off with this episode, I started by doing the road layouts here, as they kind of film the foundation of what we build in these general areas, and just going with some parallel roads to the main roads and having them intersect there. Also, one thing I forgot to mention in the last episode was that I created like an old rail yard sort of off to the north of the screen. It's just a handful of parallel rail tracks that I kind of imagine could have been a like old rail yard, and since then it's been like the city's rail yard's been relocated to a different location as the size of what was here is too small, and those white industrial buildings sort of off to the top left of the screen, my thinking is that they were like part of the rail yard complex and buildings for that. And here I'm building a roundabout in this area, and like in the last episode, I'm trying to make the entrance to the roundabout quite sharp to kind of force cars to slow down when they're entering the roundabout. I mean, that's sort of, you can only do so much with that with the limitations of the game and trying to keep those like islands in between the roads, between like the two different one-way roads, and then just going around and disabling pedestrians from crossing, and using no controller also to make like the roundabout look somewhat smooth. I mean, I think you can only really do so much with roundabouts and things before it starts getting a little bit too finicky to try and make it perfect. And also doing the road markings there and trying to make that corner a lot sharper, as it doesn't necessarily need to be that rounded, considering that the cars are only going one way from that. And here doing pedestrian crossings somewhat offset from the roundabout, simply because that's all you can really do with where the nodes are and everything. And one thing I would like in City Skylines, but it's a bit hard to do, is make like raised pedestrian crossings, which are something that we have quite a few of in New Zealand cities now, as our government's kind of focusing more on road fatalities and like pedestrians getting hit by cars and things. So they do those raised pedestrian crossings to sort of force the cars to slow down due to like the vertical change in the road basically would make it uncomfortable to drive over at a fast speed. And I mean, other countries do this too, and it has been done for a while, but New Zealand's kind of playing catch up in that regard, as was previously like a very sort of car dependent culture, and those sorts of things were somewhat neglected. Anyway, here I'm just going through and doing like a few industrial warehouses and just some random details around the back of here. I personally feel that industrial's not like the thing that I'm the best at. Like, I mean, I'm okay at it, but I wouldn't say that I'm like super confident in doing a whole bunch of industrial areas, as I enjoy doing just other things like suburbs or downtowns more than industrial, but it's kind of a part of the city that needs to be done. And I also put in that fuel station there, as I felt like it was an appropriate place, being on what is somewhat of a main road through the city that bypasses the like core of the downtown. So I figured that was appropriate. Plus there'd be like quite a lot of people working in this industrial area, just given that it is an industrial area really. And yeah, just another warehouse here. And then now I'm starting on building a bus depot, and the first thing I did was just add some more lanes coming off this roundabout, and then using this like sloped network to sort of create the ramp from the road up onto like the pavement that's level with the footpath. And then we're jumping over to building a Harvey Norman, which is a furniture store that also has like a technology section in Australia and New Zealand. And this is like right next to the bus depot area that I wanted to build, so I figured that the best way was to work out how much this building needed first, and then I could build the bus depot with the space that's left over. And here just basically I was sort of trying to convert that Mitre 10 building that I used as the base of this into a Harvey Norman, and just using the text editor with procedural objects to sort of create the like logo on the building, and then putting in a car park to sort of go with this use anyway. And I think I've put another few small shops around this. I can't actually remember what happens after this point now. I made an effort to put the disabled parking in, like right in front of the entrance to the building so that it's easy for people to access. And then there was some little awkward space that I just used these decal parking lots to sort of fill in that space that didn't really fit the parking lots or whatever. I think there are smaller ones, so I don't actually know why I use those ones now, but anyway, it doesn't matter. And just making this little loading dock around the back so that deliveries to the building can actually happen. And now we're starting on the bus depot, and I decided to use the Metlink buses as these go with the branding of the trains from Wellington, New Zealand that I'm using. So like both the buses and the trains in the city are sort of recreations of the actual buses and trains used in Wellington, New Zealand, which I think is kind of cool. I mean, I could have gone for like some generic branding, but the naming of the bus operator network, whatever system in Wellington is Metlink, so it's like generic enough that it's not tied to a specific city. Because like in Auckland, New Zealand, you've got Auckland Transport and their logo is like AT, so that's very specific, where like if you're building a city of Hunterville, that needs like a HT for like Hunterville Transport, and that doesn't really work the same. So Metlink's like, I still get the New Zealand stuff, but I don't have to worry about the branding not working as it's generic enough that it works. And just also putting in some like regular parking spaces in this tour, so I sort of felt that, you know, if there's buses, there's going to be drivers for the buses, and they need somewhere to like park at the beginning of their shift and everything. And I made it so that these are angled, and you would have seen me at some point only a couple of seconds ago, I put like heaps of buses sort of continuously one after the other to try and work out how they would actually turn around that corner and work out sort of how much space they would need in between the parking spaces for the buses to actually turn, so that it looked somewhat realistic. And I think with that I was basing it off the bus depot in Christchurch, New Zealand. There's one not far from the centre of the city there, and I was using that for inspiration. One thing I think I should point out, since I've been talking about New Zealand a lot, is for those of you that haven't been following the series, or you know, might have watched a few episodes here and there, but aren't really all that familiar with the city, this is Hunterville, and it's based off like New Zealand and Australian cities. I'm from New Zealand myself, so that was sort of the main inspiration. And I mean, mostly New Zealand, but Australia isn't that different in terms of like our cities and everything like that. So I just thought I'd add that in there because I realized I'd been talking about like a lot of different New Zealand things, and it was worth pointing out. Anyway, here we're building like some sort of terraced houses. There's probably actually a lot of parking here now that I've placed down that like singular row of parking. I did add in some disability car parks though. Anyway, this area is right beside the train station that we built in the last episode. So it's like readily accessible to public transport and things so that people don't have to use their cars to get around. So some great transit-oriented development that I've been adding to Hunterville. In this area, I also worked on like a big ramp coming up from the train station underpass and built a little playground next to that. So now we're into the second part of the episode, and this involves building the city's sports stadium. The stadium itself was not that hard, as it's simply just an asset that was created by Ali Targers based off the Sky Stadium in Wellington, New Zealand. But I decided to create a parking structure beside the stadium, and that's what most of this section of the episode is just me struggling to make this gigantic parking building, basically. And my inspiration for this was literally just the parking building next to the stadium in Wellington. And as you see me here, I'm starting to place down these expressway pillars from Ronix, and I basically use these throughout this build to create the parking structure. And here I'm sort of creating like the walls that sort of protect people from driving over the edge of the parking building. I guess in the ground floor instance, it's not like that much of an issue, but once you get up into like the first level, you would definitely need this. And here I'm just starting to place down the actual parking lot assets. Here I'm using the raisable parking lots, which actually function. So when there is a sports match at the stadium, this parking lot actually just like fills up. And I stress tested this with like the simulation and having the game play through and things. And I found that in this instance, it was actually better on the traffic to turn the parking AI, realistic parking AI on in Traffic Manager President Edition, which up until now, my experience of doing that has been terrible because the cars just sort of circle around your whole city like 10 times to try and find a car park before they give up. But in this one specific circumstance, because the cars could find a car park, they weren't like slowing down and stopping in the road and despawning all in the same place, such that the traffic flowed better into this. It was actually quite surprising, but I mean, I did add a solid few hundred car parking spaces here, and they actually function, and it is of a somewhat realistic scale. However, on saying that, the stadium asset has a capacity in game for like 25,000 people, which I think is like the realistic capacity of the stadium. But within City Skylines, I think that's a bit high, to say the least, just simply because of the scale of city you can actually realistically sort of build in this game and have it not take years. I say that, and my population's at what, like 15,000, and I've been working on the city for like 3 years, but yeah, that's another topic for another time. Anyway, here I've now sort of completed the first level, and it was shown before, but I created like a little area with like a staircase and area for a lift. I don't think at this point I'd actually put the lift in yet or done much work there. But yeah, that's coming soon, and just using these concrete like pads, base, whatever you want to call it, just as like the ceiling of this area, and then also the like ground of the next one, or I might put ploppable pavement or asphalt over the top of it, I'm not sure yet. Anyway, this build, I started it in September 2021 and finished it in April this year. So it took me like 6 months overall, but I had a lot going on in real life that I didn't work on this for a long time. But also creating this structure really demotivated me to play the game for a good while. And that goes like without saying, because I cut a lot of it out here, but there was a lot of sort of trial and error and trying to work out how things should be before I actually got to the stage where I am at on screen. But anyway, here I'm putting in the staircase and using this wall to sort of create the balustrade, and then also just trying to work out how not to make this look absolutely terrible. I did actually get to the end of this episode, and I decided like not to finish detailing the top just because it was far too complex. Even just doing this like ramp down to the actual stadium building was quite hard, since there's like an elevation difference from having the 2 levels of car parking. So the whole thing slopes down and it's probably too steep to actually be realistic, but it was the best I could do given like the space I have and not wanting things to be like a super huge scale within the city, since this is actually quite noticeable from the aerial view of the city, like this big parking lot here. Anyway, back to what's going on screen. I'm now building out this sort of overhanging part of like the main outdoor concourse area, and my thinking is just that this is so that people can get to like additional gates where that glass is on the stadium building, but mainly just really so that the glass on the stadium building made sense as to why it's there. Since it's based off a real life building, and that building is in like a slightly different location with relation to the parking lot and everything else. In some ways the parking lot's actually just like a big mirror of the real life location with like the stadium and the train station and everything else. But here I'm now working on actually making doors for these lifts, and I put like put like 2 rectangles on the procedural objects text thing, and put like one that covers the whole of the door and one that's slightly smaller and sort of only shows up on like the first rectangle only shows on 2 sides, so it looks like the door has depth even though it doesn't. But I mean, you can't really see it here because it's not on the screen right now, and I'm working on the upper staircase part. I really sort of don't really like this arrangement 100%, but it was the best thing I could come up with within the limited space. And like in the real life Wellington stadium and train station, they're located quite close to each other, and there's these pedestrian walkways going like right from the train platforms to the stadium, so I was trying to recreate that here. But anyway, I was just narrowing the pedestrian paths here so that they weren't like so overbearing, because these are just like vanilla park life bridges or paths or what have you. So just narrowing them there. And then I also did some off-camera work in this episode and changed some of the industrial areas adjacent to what we built in the last episode, just because I sort of wanted to have things all sort of seem in the same style, I guess, and just like generally going around and changing things that I built like 2 years ago, and I'm kind of stuck in that rabbit hole because also not destroyed, but I unsubscribed from a lot of buildings that resulted in a lot of gaps in the downtown, and it basically the main built-up area that I have built basically needs redoing because it's just not that great now. Anyway, that's the end of the video, and next week we'll be working on filling in the rest of the gaps in the city and doing some higher density residential and a supermarket and a few other bits and pieces here and there. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode.